Soundboard is a production of the Austin Audio Lab.
Learning about your past so that you can make super cool laser sounds in the future. It's all happening now on Soundboard with Mark and Gabe.
Hello everyone and welcome to episode 3 of Soundboard. Soundboard is an audio production podcast hosted by myself, Mark Stelter, and captain of this Starship Enterprise, Gabe Alvarez.
On today's episode, we'll take a bit of a rewind, and Mark is going to dive deep into the history of recorded sound and talk about the incredible innovations that made it happen.
And shooting forward from that history, Gabe is going to be discussing how to use all of the modern resources we have available to create incredibly immersive sound effects. So with that, let's hit 88 miles per hour and start with a blast from the past. We as a society have been interested in recording ourselves in one capacity or another for millennia, whether it be through written works or stories passed down across generations. It's a way for us as individuals to share our experiences and emotions with others. Sound and music is no different. Musical notation, I would argue, is the earliest form of quote-unquote recorded sound, giving us insight into the creative minds of those long past. We've all heard Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, well, at least the Ode to Joy part, anyways, even though none of us were able to hear it when he wrote it. And to be fair, he couldn't really hear it either. Now you might say that's kind of a cop-out, and I'd respond, yeah, okay, point taken. What we currently perceive as actual recording, as in what I'm doing right now, started in the 1850s. It was around this time that in March of 1857, that a Parisian inventor named Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville invented something called the Phonograph. Now, this device has been largely overlooked in the public perception of sound recording because it lacked one of the key elements that we now associate with recording: the ability to play sound back. Now, as the name implies, the device created an imprint or autograph of Martinville's voice as a vibrating stylus traced the sound waves across a piece of paper or glass coated with soot. And after Martinville's death in 1879, you would think no one would be able to hear his voice again, until, in 2008, a group known as the First Sounds Collective digitally recovered the sound wave recorded by the Phonograph and was able to reproduce his voice singing the French folk song Au clair de la lune. And it sounds, let's be honest, it doesn't sound great. But let's take a step back and realize what we're listening to. This is the actual voice of a man that lived 162 years ago. He made this recording in 1860, which is the same year that Abraham Lincoln was elected president. This is the same time that the concept and practicality of electricity was still in its infancy, and commercial electric light wouldn't really even become available until the 1880s. And even then, it was very much a luxury and not widespread in many homes. So compare that to the ease with which we can record today, and that is incredibly impressive. Martinville's Phonograph was the first in a flurry of inventions in the later years of the 1800s that would propel the recording of sound into what we hear today. One of those inventions, and probably the one that we are most familiar with as far as the beginning of recorded sound is concerned, is the phonograph invented by Thomas Edison in 1877. And while Edison was the first to create a prototype and patent the device, he did have a contemporary back in Paris by the name of Charles Cros, who almost beat him to the punch. Crowe had written a thesis and submitted it to the Academy of Science in Paris based on similar principles as the phonograph several weeks before Edison filed his patent in the United States. However, what Crowe gained in primacy and being first, he lacked in technicality. His thesis contained very sound ideas and a proof of concept, but didn't provide any diagrams or blueprints for how to actually make his device, which he would later call the Paleophone. As such, the phonograph is still largely credited as the first device capable both of recording sound and sound reproduction. Edison's first version of the phonograph used a grooved metal cylinder covered in tinfoil powered by a hand crank to allow the vibrating stylus to record sounds onto the foil paper. To play the sound back, the cylinder was then connected to a large horn that amplified the sound to audible levels. If you've ever put the needle down on a vinyl record before turning on your speaker, that's pretty close to what the cylinder sounded like without amplification. These tinfoil recordings, however, weren't exactly the most durable or effective medium to store or play back sound, since the foil would wear out over time and continued use. But since he was content at the moment with his patent on the phonograph itself, Edison went on to focus on other things, like stealing the best ideas from Nikola Tesla. Historical grudge matches and jokes aside, the phonograph and cylinder were quickly refined by several contemporaneous inventors. Charles Sumner Tainter and Chichester Bell, working under Alexander Graham Bell at his Volta laboratory. They improved upon the foil cylinders by covering a cardboard cylinder in wax, which still allowed the vibrating stylus to imprint sound waves and proved to be both more durable as well as cost-effective. And so these wax cylinders would be the primary method of recording all the way through the 1920s, but they were fairly bulky and difficult to store. Enter Emil Berliner, a German immigrant to the United States in the 1870s, who quite literally turned the recording world on its side. In 1888, Berliner developed the precursor to the vinyl record, the gramophone, as well as flat disc records made out of material called shellac. While the shellac records were even more durable than wax cylinders and even easier to maintain, they were more expensive to produce. As such, they wouldn't become commercially viable until right around 1929, when the process to create them became more refined and they finally overtook the cylinder approach. This brings us into the modern era of recording and the advent of electrical over acoustic recording techniques that allowed for even greater quality sound capture and reproduction. Be sure to tune in to the next episode of Soundboard when I'll delve into the evolution of the LP and the beginnings of digital recording technology that pretty much allows us to do what we're doing right now.
In 1977, Star Wars explodes onto the cinematic scene, arresting audiences worldwide and catalyzing decades of adoration, discussion, obsession. Star Wars forever changes the ecology of filmmaking, but since conversations about its artistic, technical, and cultural merits are pretty oversaturated at this point, there really isn't much novel insight for us to offer, despite, Mark and I being big fans of the franchise. So we'll just move on. Now, when I think of Star Wars, three things come immediately to mind. The visual effect, amazing visual effects, the music, my God, just, and the iconic sounds. Ben Burtt, now legendary sound designer, unproven at the time, is recruited by George Lucas to define the sounds of this gritty, industrial, organic, but grounded universe Lucas wants to capture. And Burtt recalls, it was very unusual for someone to be employed to make specific sounds for film. Then along came George Lucas. Lucas says, take a year and go out and collect all the interesting sounds you can think of. So he does. Burtt takes his field recorder and an open mind, and he ends up handcrafting an expansive catalog of sounds. Things that he thinks to record, things that he just hears that surprise him. And he takes it all back to the studio and starts building libraries and libraries of sounds, places, people, technologies. And their unorthodox methodology yields unorthodox and genre-defining results. especially when it comes to the sounds I was thinking of for today. Blasters. Blasters in Star Wars are ubiquitous. Every character uses one at some point, and every ship has like the heavy. It's an iconic sound. To me, it's an iconic sound, and this is wild coming from a series that has no shortage of iconic sounds. And the story is that their discovery is a complete accident. Bert's hiking in the Pocono Mountains. His backpack gets caught on like a radio tower guy line, and it pings it, and he hears the as the vibration goes up and down the metal cable, and that's where he gets the idea to come back and record the sound for Star Wars. So I decided, I've seen some of those in my neighborhood. Let me see what I can do. I don't have any cool radio towers in walking distance, but I'd seen like power lines with support wires that I figured would work just the same. I had a pretty good idea where to look. Not exact, but pretty good. And that was actually my first challenge. Location. Things are really hard to find I feel like I notice things more when I'm not looking for them, so I spent a lot of time just kind of walking. But the good news is, you can just follow the power lines and they will take you where you want to go, usually. Problem is when you spend a couple hours hitting power lines with a big wrench, people kind of start noticing and looking at you weird. Second challenge was condition. All the cables that I found were really small in diameter. A lot of them were too slack to work, or they were resting on a tree branch or something. I could tell that the sound was going to be muffled. I wasn't going to get the sound that I was really looking for. And I was really worried about the sounds I was getting. But I did what I could. I had my beat up contact mic and going at the cables with like a wrench, a hammer, a screwdriver, just trying things. They didn't all sound good. I didn't know if any of it sounded good, or if I had anything that I could actually use. But it was a nice day, and I like walking around. I was pretty excited to listen back. I was pretty nervous, but I was pretty excited. I had recorded every combination of cable and tool for like a minute each, so I ended up with a lot to sort through. And unfortunately, as I sorted through it, I found that a lot of it failed to bring me joy. I knew that I was working under less than optimal conditions, so I tried to anticipate iffy results. But I thought even the takes I got were pretty disappointing. I don't know, they're dull, they're muffled, they lack like an immediate character for me. And then I found the good ones. Some of them were good. Some of them were good. It's like this balance of finding the right tension, the right diameter, the right impact, the right instrument. I was just happy to be moving in the right direction. And then the fun part. Maybe somebody's made an official guide somewhere on how you should do it, but I took the opportunity to sit down in the lab and go full-on mad scientist on it. First, I raised the gain and completely blew out the levels so it had this intrusive, ugly, distorted quality. And then I tweaked out combinations of pitch shifting and overdrive and some flange. Did some experimenting with EQ until I had something that I felt had like a grounded quality, this familiar weapon sound, but with this gritty analog messiness that the key was I gave myself the freedom to see what I would get. And what I got was pretty cool. So as it turns out, it's not so hard, given the right tools, to create your own custom blaster sounds from sounds you source yourself. which is a great skill to realize when you do a lot of work in the sci-fi genre, as we do. Now, as I put these sounds together, I do so with producing audio fiction specifically in mind. And as I started exporting these sounds and cleaning them up, I kind of had them layered and randomly, and so as I'm hearing them play back, I'm in kind of a sci-fi sort of mood, and I get a little inspired. So I went ahead and grabbed some old recordings I had handy. A ceiling fan of a hotel bathroom, a condenser on my friend's refrigerator, vibrations from a helicopter ride Mark and I took, and, of course, my vacuum cleaner. And with a little EQ on those blasters, it almost sounds like we're flying over some kind of Star War. Add some music, some switches and buttons in the foreground, and all of a sudden you're propelling your audience into a scene. An exciting, kinetic scene. A scene full of blasters nobody has ever heard before. And you just have these blasters they're all over the place, and you've got the people, and they're running like, move, yeah, get down, move, get to cover, and then the ship flies up, and, or whatever you want to do, they're your blaster sounds. And if you want to check out our blaster sounds, find a link in today's show notes, or visit our blog at austinaudiolab.com.
Well, thanks for listening to this episode of Soundboard. Join us next time for more history on the recording process and further insights into all the different ways we can use and combine sounds to make something entirely new.
You can find links to the gear we used and the sources we referenced for today's episode in the show notes or on our blog post at austinaudiolab.com. This is the Austin Audio Laboratory, signing off for now.